This is Fill in the Blanks podcast. And this morning, we're going to have the hard conversations around emotions that family members experience after their loved one sustained a traumatic brain injury. I'm Ilani, and I'm a clinical social worker. I worked 7.5 years in neuro-rehabilitation alongside family members that went through all the phases of emotions after their loved one sustained a traumatic brain injury. My experience is that oftentimes families were resistant to really name the emotions because it was almost like saying it out loud made it so real. And that's why today I'm taking the time to actually talk about this difficult thing. I'm going to run through the 4 phases of emotions that families often go through after sustaining a traumatic brain injury. Phase 1. So this is really your loved one just sustained the injury, they are in the ICU, there's a lot of uncertainty at this point. You probably didn't get hold of a doctor to give you any feedback on the extent of the injury, what you can expect moving forward, how long your loved one is going to be in hospital. You might be feeling a lot of anxiety, feelings of disbelief. How did this happen? How is this my life? How am I standing in this hospital? You will also be faced with your body reacting. Oftentimes, family members go through a phase during this initial phase where they really struggle to eat, where they really struggle to sleep, where they really struggle to remember their day-to-day things. What actually happens in our brain and in our body when we are in a state of trauma is that our thinking mind switches off. During this time, you are in survival mode. You are in fight, in flight, or in fawn. That means that your brain is trying to keep you as safe as possible while you are facing this absolute life-changing event. At this point in time, you can expect that you will start to feel burnt out, that you will start to feel that things are too much, that you will start to feel that you feel completely out of control of this situation, and you don't know what to do. Phase 2 is when your loved one is stabilized, they go to rehabilitation, and they are now embarking on the next 6 to 8 to 12 weeks of inpatient rehabilitation. At this point, the emotions that you might be feeling include, I'm just happy that they are alive. So there will be a sense of relief. You've gone through the ICU, you've gone through the critical time where the doctors might have said they don't know if your loved one is going to make it. And now, finally, your loved one is stabilized, they are in rehabilitation. So that sense of relief. But then you will also start noticing that although you are happy and relieved that your loved one is alive, you start to feel a little bit of a variety of emotions, seeing that your loved one is different now. So oftentimes, the people that talk about trauma and the emotional impact of trauma talk about complex grief. Actually grieving a life and grieving a person while they are still alive. And oftentimes families start to grieve their previous lives and the person before during this phase. Usually because now, oftentimes after sustaining a traumatic brain injury, there are things that will remain different with your loved one. Your loved one is physically, emotionally, socially not the same as they were before. Oftentimes, family members during this phase is also very much in we need to put systems in place. We need to get stuff done. We need to send a sick note to the employer. We need to sort out ABC. We need to sort out the policies. So they are very much in the go, go, go mode. And the emotions are oftentimes left to deal with later. Later will definitely come. I can assure you that. But during the rehabilitation phase, I found working with families that often they were quite resistant to talking about their emotions. So they would often tell me, no, but my loved one is okay. We're going to get through this. Everything is okay. And they actually call this a little bit of functional denial, which is not a bad thing, but also this hope that is conditional on your loved one returning to being exactly the way they were before, often is the match to the fire when you realize that after sustaining a traumatic brain injury, that things are never the same again. Phase 3 is when your loved one comes home. So oftentimes this is the most difficult emotional phase for family members. So what we need to understand is that the patient goes through their own emotional process. They go through their own loss of function, loss of what they knew their previous life to be, loss of things that they hope to do in the future. And this is specifically talking about a severe traumatic brain injury. So someone who can't really return to work, who's immediately able to drive a car immediately, someone who still needs caregiving intervention in the home environment. I'm talking about the severe traumatic brain injuries here specifically. So the patient goes through their own emotional process. The family members often need to support the patient going through their emotional processes, as well as now coming to terms with, my loved one is coming home and things are still not the same. Family members often hold on to the hope that as soon as my loved one gets back home, things are going to go back to normal. And as soon as your loved one is home and you realize that things are not back to normal, that is really where the trauma of the event hits home very quickly and very severely. And those emotions that we were not willing to face during the inpatient rehabilitation process is now so big that we can't not face them when our loved one comes home. The difficulty with only facing your emotions when your loved one comes home is oftentimes the support network has now fallen away. The therapy team, the social worker, the psychologist has stepped away because inpatient rehabilitation has been completed. And now you as a loved one are faced with the different life, the coordination of therapy, the management of the household by yourself, and the emotions accompanying this by yourself. And the fourth phase of emotions is realizing that this is our lives now. This phase usually only comes around about 1.5 to 2 years after sustaining the injury. This is after the stabilization and being in, is my loved one going to live or die? Going through rehabilitation, I'm happy that they are here. I'm starting to see that things are different. I'm going through a phase of grieving my old life, how things used to be, how I want it to be. Going home and being faced with now being solely responsible for your loved one's care, therapy management, home management, and ensuring that they live their day-to-day lives, to now the fourth phase, like I mentioned, where you are actually accepting that recovery might mean we are adjusting to a new normal now. Things that are extremely difficult for family members is firstly, your friends, your loved ones, your colleagues, people in your circles who are not in your situation really doesn't understand what you go through. They don't understand the emotional roller coaster that you are on, the demands that are placed on you emotionally, physically, financially. The second thing is, being a loved one of someone who sustained a traumatic brain injury can be extremely isolating. So oftentimes, especially when friends initially are very involved, they visit, they bring food, at some stage their lives also go on and they step away. So it can feel extremely isolating. Then role changes that take place. That can be very emotionally taxing on family members, because all of a sudden they are no longer able just to be a spouse, to be a daughter, to be a son, to be a husband. They are now from coordinator of therapies to home manager to ensuring that their loved one is medically stable and kept alive in the home environment. So the demand on family members physically and emotionally at home is quite severe. And then just the grieving process of understanding that the life that you thought you were going to live, the future that you thought you were going to have, looks different now. No matter how we package a traumatic brain injury, a traumatic brain injury is a revocable, life-changing event. And the only way to move through trauma is to accept change and to accept that this is the new normal. But that doesn't just happen overnight. And especially when it gets to phase 4, you've already gone through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So often, family caregivers are quite severely burnt out emotionally at this stage. So I really want to encourage family members to, from the get-go, from the initial admission to hospital, to reach out to the psychologist, to the counselor, to the social worker that's part of the team, and move through your emotions as things unfold, because that is the only way that you will be empowered to feel and be healthy emotionally in the long run. Recovery after a traumatic brain injury is a long-term process. That doesn't mean there's not light at the end of the tunnel, and I want to reiterate that. Life isn't over after your loved one sustained a traumatic brain injury. One just needs to understand it is a life-changing event. It isn't just a medical event. It's an event that affects the entire family, and how family members deal with their emotions and look after themselves is going to set them up for success or for failure in the long run. This is Ilani. This is Fill in the Blanks podcast, where we have the difficult conversations aimed at empowering family members to move through trauma and to accept change.